You're sitting across the table from someone you've known for years. They smile, they laugh, they say all the right things, but something in your body feels off, tense, as if your nervous system has picked up on something your conscious mind is still denying. And yet, like you've done for years, you push the feeling down, you rationalize it. You tell yourself they mean well. You even wonder, maybe it's me. This, Nietzsche would say, is the beginning of a spiritual decay, not because of the person in front of you, but because of your unwillingness to see the truth. In the United States, we're taught to be polite, to keep the peace. Especially as we age, we internalize messages like don't rock the boat or family is everything. But Nietzsche challenges this. He believed that suffering isn't always evil. Sometimes it's a signal, a wake-up call, and ignoring it, out of habit or fear, is a betrayal of our inner strength. A toxic person doesn't always scream or belittle. Sometimes they flatter, they manipulate subtly. They weaponize your empathy, and the older we get, the more likely we are to tolerate it. Not because we're weak, but because we're tired. We tell ourselves, it's not worth the fight. But what if the cost of peace is our mental and emotional clarity? Nietzsche warned of what he called slave morality, a mindset where we suppress our instincts, deny our inner truth, and surrender to what's socially acceptable. We stay in dynamics that drain us because we confuse endurance with virtue. We remain silent because we mistake discomfort for growth. But there's a quiet violence in letting someone repeatedly cross your boundaries simply because you've known them too long to start over. Maybe it's a sibling who constantly makes backhanded comments, but you let it slide. That's just how they are. Maybe it's a friend who only calls when they need something but never shows up for you. Or a coworker who smiles to your face and tears you down in private. These are not harmless patterns. These are fractures in your self-respect. And every time you tolerate them, you dim your own light just a little more. Nietzsche believed in the will to power, the idea that life's highest aim isn't comfort but growth. To grow, we must confront what is difficult, even painful. That includes recognizing when someone is poisoning our environment under the guise of affection or obligation. This is your invitation to look again, not with politeness, but with brutal honesty. Because the truth you avoid now becomes the regret you carry later. There's a strange kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work or age, it comes from people. Have you ever noticed how after spending time with a certain person, you feel hollow? Not angry, not sad, just empty, like you gave something away, but can't quite name what it was. This is one of the clearest signs of a toxic dynamic. But in true Nietzschean fashion, the tragedy isn't the energy drains, it's your reflex to blame yourself for it. Nietzsche believed that modern morality often traps us in cycles of guilt. We confuse exhaustion with a personal flaw. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm not patient enough. But what if your fatigue is not a character weakness, but a consequence of prolonged exposure to someone who feeds on your self-doubt? As we age, this pattern becomes more entrenched. We've been trained to be the strong one, the reliable one, the understanding one. But Nietzsche would ask, at what cost? Who benefits from this self-erasure? Toxic people often use ambiguity as a shield. They don't attack directly. Instead, they project their insecurities subtly, slowly eroding your confidence. They talk over you in conversations. They mock your interests with a smile. They hijack your moments of joy with a quiet jab or a story of their own suffering. And when you begin to feel the weight of their presence, they accuse you of being distant or cold. Suddenly, you are the one who has to explain your boundaries, as if protecting your peace is a crime. Nietzsche called this inversion of values a moral reversal, where we begin to see virtues like self-respect as selfishness and tolerance of toxicity as love. We internalize this distortion until we can no longer distinguish empathy from enablement. Let's be honest. It's easier to explain away someone's behavior than to confront it, especially if that person is close to you, especially if you were raised in a culture that equates loyalty with silence. But silence is not neutral. Silence is compliance. If someone consistently leaves you feeling anxious, guilty, or drained, that's not a misunderstanding. That's a message. And Nietzsche would say, trust the part of yourself that still feels discomfort. That's your soul resisting decay. Think back to the last time you felt truly seen, energized, safe in someone's presence. That contrast is everything, because the people who nourish you won't leave you questioning your worth. They won't expect you to shrink so they can shine. They'll meet you as an equal. No games, no guilt. You owe it to yourself, especially now, in this stage of life, to protect your vitality, not out of selfishness, but out of reverence for the life force within you. It's time to stop blaming yourself for what someone else is draining. They make a joke about your weight, your memory, your relationships. And when you react, they say, "Relax, it was just a joke." But deep down, it didn't feel like one. It felt like a slap wearing a smile. Nietzsche warned us about the passive-aggressive mask of social norms. In his critique of modern morality, he saw how our culture teaches people to express their resentments in indirect ways, and humor, especially the kind that humiliates, becomes a disguise for cruelty that's been socially approved. In American culture, sarcasm is everywhere. We grow up with it in sitcoms, school hallways, family dinners. It's sharp, it's fast, and sometimes it's toxic, especially when someone uses it to consistently belittle you under the guise of being funny. When this happens repeatedly, you start to second-guess your perception. You wonder, am I overreacting? Maybe I'm too sensitive. But Nietzsche would say, pay attention. That discomfort you feel, that's not weakness, that's your soul recognizing a violation. There's a term Nietzsche used, ressentiment. It describes the bitterness of someone who cannot express their power openly, so they express it through veiled attacks. Instead of confronting you directly, they chip away at your dignity through subtle digs. And then they demand your laughter, your complicity, your silence. This creates a toxic emotional trap. If you speak up, you're too serious. If you stay silent, you're slowly degraded. Over time, this pattern begins to reshape how you see yourself. You become smaller. You question your value. You brace yourself before every encounter, not for physical harm, but for emotional sabotage. And here's the worst part. It often comes from people we love, a sibling, a longtime friend, a partner, someone who knows your soft spots and pokes them, not to connect, but to dominate. Nietzsche would call this a will to power corrupted by cowardice. Instead of rising through strength, they try to feel tall by making others feel small. But you're not here to play small. You've lived too much life, overcome too many storms, to keep laughing at your own expense just to keep the peace. You've earned the right to say that wasn't funny. You've earned the right to walk away from someone who uses you as the punchline of their unresolved pain. It's not about being humorless. It's about knowing the difference between laughter that heals and laughter that harms. And it's about reclaiming your boundaries, not with rage, but with quiet certainty. Because if someone needs to diminish you to feel alive, they don't belong in the sacred space of your peace. Nietzsche believed the path to personal freedom begins with truth. And sometimes that truth is, it wasn't a joke, it was an attack, and I deserve better. It starts subtly. They tell you how no one else understands them, how everyone abandons them, how hard their life has been. And then they look at you, as if you're the last person holding the thread. You feel special, needed, responsible. And just like that, you're no longer relating from choice, but from guilt. This is emotional manipulation in its most insidious form, and Nietzsche would call it a betrayal of your inner freedom. In his writings, Nietzsche warned of the tyranny of the weak, people who appear fragile, helpless, or broken, but use those qualities to dominate others emotionally. This isn't about being vulnerable. Vulnerability is honest. But weaponized weakness? That's a mask, a tool, a strategy. Toxic people often rely on your empathy. They count on your kindness to bind you. They create crises, real or exaggerated, and position themselves as victims so you'll feel obligated to stay. You become their emotional caretaker, their rescuer, their buffer against the world. But what you may not realize is that your own needs begin to disappear in the process. Think of how many times you've cancelled your plans, suppressed your feelings, or stayed silent just to avoid hurting them. How often you've walked on eggshells to avoid setting them off. How you've twisted your own emotional truth just to preserve their fragile sense of self. Nietzsche challenges this dynamic by asking a brutal question. Are you being moral, or are you being manipulated? And more importantly, who is benefiting from your silence? The moral code most of us inherited, especially in the American culture of stoicism and emotional duty, teaches us to be loyal, selfless, and forgiving. But Nietzsche warned that these so-called virtues can be hijacked to keep strong people submissive. When compassion becomes a leash, it's no longer noble, it's oppressive. You might be thinking, but they're not a bad person. And maybe they're not. But toxicity doesn't require malice. only a pattern that consistently costs you your peace. You were not born to be anyone's emotional crutch, not in your 20s, and especially not now. At this point in life, your emotional energy is sacred. You've earned the right to protect your inner world from those who constantly rewrite reality to keep you emotionally indebted. You've earned the right to love someone without losing yourself, to help without becoming their hostage. Nietzsche believed that true strength lies in self-overcoming, not in saving others from their chaos, but in resisting the illusion that it's your job to fix them. So if someone is using their pain as a chain to keep you close, to make you feel guilty, to keep you small, recognize it for what it is. Not love, not connection, but control. And you, my friend, were not made to be controlled. You walk into the room and immediately scan their face. Are they tense, quiet, overly cheerful in a forced kind of way? Your body reacts before your mind can catch up. You adjust your tone, you change your plans, you hold your breath, because their mood always dictates the atmosphere. Nietzsche would call this a quiet form of tyranny, not the kind enforced with fists, but the kind that dominates through emotional volatility. When someone's unpredictable behavior causes everyone around them to adapt, compromise, and shrink, that's not personality, that's control. This is one of the most overlooked signs of toxicity, especially in midlife when routines are established, families are formed, and social circles are smaller. We tolerate far more than we realize. We make excuses. They're just going through something. That's just how they decompress. But the question is never what they're going through. The question is, why does their chaos require your self-abandonment? Nietzsche fiercely opposed anything that smothered the individual's will to power, our deep inner drive to shape life with clarity and courage. And that includes emotional blackmail disguised as moods. When one person's emotional instability becomes the organizing principle of your day, your home, your energy, you're not in a relationship. You're in a dictatorship of feelings. Toxic people often use mood swings as a weapon. They never say, "I'm upset with you." Instead, they punish you with silence, or sudden outbursts, or vague distance that leaves you scrambling to fix a problem you don't even understand. This dynamic forces you into the role of emotional caretaker, not out of love, but out of fear of disruption. It's exhausting, it's confusing, and over time, it rewires you to believe that peace is something you must earn, not something you're inherently worthy of. In American households, especially among older generations, many people were raised to avoid conflict at all costs. Don't provoke, don't question, keep the peace. But peace built on repression is not peace, it's submission. And Nietzsche would argue that choosing discomfort in pursuit of truth is more noble than living in false harmony. Ask yourself, why are you the one always adjusting? Why is your emotional thermostat set by someone else's weather? The people in your life should regulate themselves, not make their instability your responsibility. You deserve relationships where emotions are expressed, not imposed, where people speak instead of punish, where connection is not a minefield you must tiptoe across every day. If someone's presence causes you to shrink, to brace, to dim your voice, it's time to ask the question Nietzsche never shied away from. What does this relationship cost my soul? Because emotional tyranny isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as a sigh that shuts down a room, and you were not born to live under someone else's sky. You share something important, a new goal, a recent insight, a small personal victory, and instead of celebrating with you, they smirk. They offer backhanded compliments. They say, "Don't get ahead of yourself," or "You've changed," in that tone that's not admiration but warning. That's not love, that's resistance in disguise. And Nietzsche would say, it's fear of your becoming. In his philosophy, Nietzsche held the belief that humans are not fixed. We are becoming, constantly in motion, constantly evolving towards something higher, fuller, freer. But some people in your life may not want that evolution. Why? Because the version of you that grows threatens the version of you they can control. Toxic people often wrap their criticism in the language of concern. I just don't want you to get hurt. You're aiming too high. But concern that stifles your growth is not wisdom. It's a mask for insecurity. They fear your change because your change reveals their stagnation. The moment you rise, emotionally, spiritually, or intellectually, it casts a silent light on everything they've refused to confront in themselves. And instead of rising with you, they try to pull you back down. Not always harshly, but subtly. Through jokes, through doubts, through emotional withdrawal. Nietzsche despised what he called the herd mentality, the social pressure to remain average, to avoid standing out, to settle for comfort over greatness. He believed that each individual has a deep inner drive, a will to power, not to dominate others, but to overcome their former self. Toxic people resist that process because they are committed to who you used to be, not who you are becoming. And this is especially painful in midlife. Why? Because this is the stage when many of us finally start to awaken. We start asking deeper questions. We begin to unlearn inherited roles, the fixer, the peacemaker, the invisible one. We want more, not materially, but spiritually. And the people who once knew how to keep us small feel threatened by this emergence. It might be your partner, your sibling, your best friend from decades ago. They liked you when you were agreeable, when you didn't speak up, when you made yourself smaller so others could feel big. But now you're remembering your voice, you're reclaiming your time, you're stepping into the uncomfortable, glorious truth. You're allowed to grow, even if others choose not to. And here's what Nietzsche would say: become who you are, not who they tolerate, not who they remember, but who your soul is aching to become. So when someone consistently downplays your growth, don't explain, don't shrink, don't internalize their fear, just recognize it and keep going. Because real connection celebrates your evolution. It doesn't resent it. Let's not sugarcoat this. Some people stay in our lives far longer than they should. Not because we need them, but because we're afraid of what life looks like without them. But Nietzsche would remind you, freedom isn't found in comfort, it's found in truth. So as we close, here are the final 3 signs. Sign 6. They make you doubt your reality. This is gaslighting in its most casual form. They deny what they said. They reframe past arguments. They tell you you're remembering it wrong. And over time, you begin to question not just the moment, but yourself. Nietzsche called this the erosion of the sovereign individual, a person no longer grounded in their own perception, but constantly recalibrating based on someone else's version of reality. When your lived experience is always being revised to protect someone else's comfort, you're not in a relationship. You're in a psychological prison. Sign 7. They only love the version of you that serves them. They celebrate you less when you're useful, when you agree, when you sacrifice, but when you assert boundaries, when you change, when you grow. Suddenly, you're difficult, distant, or selfish. Nietzsche despised relationships built on utility. He believed that true love is the will of 2 people to grow stronger together, not to mold one into the image of the other. If someone only values the parts of you that comply, that's not love, that's possession. Sign 8. You don't recognize yourself anymore. This is the final, most devastating sign. You've compromised so much, bit your tongue so many times, shrank yourself to fit their emotional architecture, and one day you look in the mirror and realize you've lost the fire in your eyes. Nietzsche believed that the greatest sin is self-betrayal, not because it offends others, but because it robs the world of your truest essence. He asked us to become who we are, not by following rules, but by following our inner flame. So the question now becomes, what do you do with this truth? You don't need to cut ties impulsively. Nietzsche was not advocating chaos, he was advocating honesty. You start by acknowledging what is. No more excuses, no more rationalizations. You see the patterns for what they are, and you reclaim your authority over your own mind, your own time, your own emotional reality. You start building boundaries, not walls. You speak with clarity, not cruelty. And if someone chooses to walk away because they can no longer control you, let them. Because life is short, and the years ahead of you matter more than the years behind. The people who belong in your next chapter are the ones who are not afraid of your truth. They don't shrink when you shine. They don't mock your growth. They meet you fully, freely as you are. Nietzsche believed the highest form of life is one lived authentically, even at great cost. So ask yourself, with all the courage you've earned through time, is this the life you want to continue protecting, or is it time to protect yourself?